Samantha, or Sam as her friends called her, had always been the kind of person who took charge. At 33, she was sharp, ambitious, and not one to shy away from expressing her opinions. She liked things done her way. And most of the time, she was the one making decisions in her marriage. Ethan, her husband of 6 years, was the opposite. At 35, Ethan was calm, easygoing, and the kind of guy who preferred avoiding confrontation. It wasn't that he didn't have opinions, he just didn't feel the need to voice them all the time. And for the most part, their dynamic worked. Living in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, their life was steady, predictable even. Sam managed most of their day-to-day, from their finances to planning vacations. Ethan was happy to let her lead, saying he trusted her judgment. It wasn't that he lacked a backbone, he just liked to keep the peace. Sam found it endearing. Most of the time, she'd joke to her friends that she was the boss in the relationship. And Ethan never seemed to mind. It was a dynamic that worked for both of them, or so she thought. The cracks, small as they were, started to show in the little things. Ethan had recently started spending more time with his best friend, Ryan, someone Sam had always found a little too opinionated for her taste. Ryan was one of those guys who thrived in social situations, effortlessly commanding attention with his loud laughter and larger-than-life stories. Ethan didn't have many friends, so when Ryan invited him out for beers or a game night, Sam encouraged it. She figured it was good for Ethan to get out more, especially since he wasn't naturally the social type. But lately, Sam couldn't help but notice that Ethan seemed different after those hangouts, not in an obvious way, but enough to make her wonder. One evening, while they were both unwinding after dinner, Ethan mentioned that Ryan was throwing a party that weekend. He sounded casual, almost hesitant, as he brought it up. Ryan's hosting this thing at his place on Saturday. Just a small get-together, Ethan said, looking up from his phone. You wanna come? Sam paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. Ethan rarely invited her to these things. Usually, she stayed home while he went to hang out with Ryan and his crew. It wasn't that she didn't like them, they were nice enough, but she always felt a little out of place in their loud beer and burgers vibe. Sure, she said, after a moment. Sounds fun. Ethan smiled. But there was something about the way he quickly looked back down at his phone that gave her pause. It wasn't like him to avoid eye contact. When Saturday rolled around, Sam found herself standing in front of the mirror, smoothing out her blouse. She wasn't one to overthink what she wore, but for some reason, she wanted to make a good impression tonight. Ethan seemed to notice too. You look great, he said as she came downstairs, his voice warm but almost distracted. You clean up pretty well yourself, Sam teased, giving him a playful nudge. He was wearing the navy button-down she'd bought him for their anniversary last year, and it suited him. The drive to Ryan's place was uneventful, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was quieter than usual. She chalked it up to pre-party nerves. Ethan wasn't the type to thrive in big social situations, but once he got comfortable, he usually settled in. When they arrived, Ryan greeted them at the door with his usual energy, clapping Ethan on the back and pulling Sam into a hug. The house was buzzing with people, laughter spilling out from the living room where a group was already deep into a game of charades. Sam noticed a few familiar faces, people she'd met briefly at other gatherings, but for the most part, it was a sea of strangers. Make yourselves at home, Ryan said, handing Ethan a beer. Sam, wine's in the kitchen if you're interested. Sam nodded and made her way to the kitchen, where a few women were chatting near the counter. She grabbed a glass of red and joined the conversation, quickly finding herself at ease. Sam had a knack for blending in, for finding just the right balance between being friendly and commanding attention. Tonight was no different. Every so often, she glanced across the room to check on Ethan. He was with Ryan and a few other guys, laughing at something someone said. He seemed relaxed, and for a moment, Sam felt a pang of guilt. She often joked about Ethan's quiet nature, but seeing him like this, at ease and smiling, it reminded her of the side of him she'd fallen in love with. As the night went on, Sam found herself in a lively discussion with a group of guests about relationships. The topic shifted to trust, how much you could count on your partner in tough situations. It was light-hearted at first, with everyone sharing funny stories and hypotheticals. Sam smiled, feeling a spark of mischief. She glanced at Ethan, who was sitting across the room, his beer in hand and that familiar easygoing expression on his face. Without thinking, she quipped, "Oh, Ethan? I mean, I love him, but he's not exactly the guy you'd want in a bar fight. He'd probably offer to buy the guy a drink instead." The group erupted into laughter. And for a moment, Sam felt that rush she always got when she knew she'd nailed a joke. Ethan glanced over, his smile polite but not reaching his eyes. Something about the way he looked away so quickly made her stomach tighten. She ignored it, brushing off the feeling. It was just a joke, after all, but deep down, she couldn't shake the sense that tonight, something was different. The party at Ryan's had been lively, full of laughter and good vibes, at least for everyone else. For Samantha, or Sam as most called her, it had started out great. She had mingled, charmed a few strangers, and basked in the occasional laughs her jokes earned. But by the end of the night, something had changed. Ethan, her husband, had left the party abruptly, barely saying a word before grabbing his jacket and walking out the door. It wasn't like him, and it left Sam standing there, stunned and confused, surrounded by the awkward silence that his exit created. Is everything okay?" Ryan asked, breaking the tension as the laughter from her last joke died out. Sam forced a smile, brushing it off. "Yeah, he's probably just tired. You know how he is." But as she said the words, doubt crept in. Ethan wasn't the type to cause a scene or storm out, not even when he was upset. He usually just brushed things off with a small shrug or a quiet comment later. After they were home, so why had he left like that? She stayed at the party for another hour, trying to shake off the strange mood that lingered after Ethan's departure. People were polite, but the easy laughter from earlier felt forced now. Even Ryan seemed to be avoiding eye contact with her, which only added to her growing irritation. By the time she called an Uber to head home, she was more annoyed than anything else. When she walked into the house, the lights were off except for the soft glow coming from the bedroom. Ethan was already in bed, lying on his side with his back to the door. Sam sighed loudly, hoping to get some sort of reaction. But he didn't move. "Really?" she muttered under her breath as she changed into her pajamas. She slid into bed, expecting him to say something. Anything. About what had happened, but the silence stretched between them, heavy and unrelenting, until she finally gave up and closed her eyes. The next morning, Ethan was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and his phone. The usual easy smile he wore was nowhere to be found. Instead, his expression was unreadable, his shoulders slightly hunched as he scrolled through whatever was on his screen. Sam poured herself a cup of coffee, the tension from the night before still hanging in the air. "Morning," she said, trying to sound casual. Ethan didn't look up. "Morning," he replied, his tone clipped. Sam set her cup down a little harder than necessary, the sound breaking the quiet. "Okay, are we seriously doing this? Are you going to ignore me all day? Or are you going to tell me what your problem is?" Ethan finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, he said nothing, and Sam was almost tempted to fill the silence herself. But then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "You humiliated me, Sam." The words hit her like a splash of cold water. "What? Humiliated you? Are you serious?" "Yes, I'm serious," Ethan said, his gaze unwavering. "Last night, in front of everyone, you made me the punchline of your jokes. You didn't just tease me, you tore me down. And when you saw I wasn't laughing, you didn't stop, you doubled down." Sam blinked, caught off guard by the calm intensity in his voice. "It was a joke, Ethan. Everyone was laughing. You're being way too sensitive about this." Ethan shook his head, setting his coffee mug down with a soft thud. "It wasn't just a joke, Sam. It was disrespectful. You don't talk about your husband like that in front of other people. Especially not in a way that makes him feel small." Sam let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Disrespectful? Come on, Ethan. You're overreacting. People know I love you, they weren't taking it seriously. But I was. Ethan shot back, his voice rising slightly. You made me feel like a fool. Do you even realize how hard that was for me? Sitting there, trying to laugh it off while everyone around me was laughing at me? Sam crossed her arms, leaning back in her chair. So, what? You're mad because I made a couple of jokes? If you're so fragile that you can't handle a little teasing, maybe that's something you need to work on. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. This isn't about being fragile, Sam. It's about respect. And right now, it feels like you don't have any for me. The words hung in the air. And for the first time, Sam didn't have an immediate comeback. Instead, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar, doubt. She pushed it aside quickly, refusing to let it take root. You know what, she said, standing up and grabbing her coffee. I don't have time for this. You're being ridiculous. I didn't do anything wrong. Ethan didn't stop her as she walked out of the kitchen, but she could feel his eyes on her as she left. His silence was unnerving, but she told herself he'd get over it. He always did. That was how their relationship worked. She pushed. He bent, and things went back to normal. But as the days went on, something shifted. Ethan wasn't bouncing back like he usually did. He didn't bring up the party again. But he was distant, quieter than usual. He started spending more time with Ryan and the guys, coming home later than he used to. And when he was home, he wasn't as present. Sam told herself it was just a phase, that he was still sulking and would snap out of it eventually. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was different this time. Ethan wasn't acting like the man she thought she knew. And for the first time in their marriage, Sam felt a small, unfamiliar pang of fear. What if this wasn't something he'd get over? What if this time, she'd pushed too far? The days after the party felt different, off in a way Samantha couldn't quite put her finger on. Ethan was still the same person in theory, polite, calm, and easygoing, but there was something unspoken simmering beneath the surface. He wasn't smiling as much, wasn't as eager to engage in conversations. His usual jokes, the ones she found endearing, had all but disappeared. And it wasn't just Ethan, it was their dynamic. Something intangible had shifted between them. And for the first time, Samantha couldn't tell where they stood. At first, she brushed it off. Everyone has bad weeks, right? Maybe he was just stressed about work or still sulking over the party. She figured it would blow over, like everything else. But the more she tried to go about things as usual, the more she noticed the cracks. One evening, as she scrolled through her phone on the couch, Ethan came in and grabbed his keys from the counter. Heading out, he said casually, not even pausing to meet her eyes. Where are you going? She asked. Looking up. Ryan's. Just grabbing dinner with the guys. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Ethan rarely went out without her unless it was something Ryan had arranged. Even then, he usually asked if she wanted to tag along. But now, there wasn't even a hint of an invitation. You've been spending a lot of time with Ryan lately, she said, keeping her tone light but laced with curiosity. Ethan paused at the door, turning to look at her. Yeah, I guess I have. Before she could ask more, he was out the door, leaving her sitting there with her thoughts. She hated how unsettled it made her feel. Ethan wasn't the type to pull away. He was steady, reliable. If anyone was supposed to feel disconnected or frustrated in their marriage, it was her, not him. That was how things had always been. But now, she wasn't so sure. The next weekend, Samantha tried to reclaim some normalcy. She suggested they spend Saturday together, brunch, maybe a movie, and then dinner at their favorite restaurant. Ethan agreed, but his enthusiasm felt muted, like he was just going along with it out of obligation. At brunch, she found herself trying harder than usual to make conversation, cracking jokes and bringing up topics she thought might interest him. But his responses were short, almost distracted, like he was physically there but mentally somewhere else. Everything okay? She asked finally, setting her coffee cup down. You've been quiet. Ethan looked up from his plate, his expression unreadable. Yeah, I'm fine. Fine doesn't really sound fine. She pressed, leaning forward slightly. If something's bothering you, you can tell me. He hesitated, his fork pausing mid-air. For a moment, It looked like he was going to say something. But then he just shook his head. It's nothing. Samantha forced a smile, but the unease in her chest only grew. She'd seen that hesitation before. It wasn't like Ethan to keep things bottled up, at least. Not to this extent. She told herself she was imagining it. That she was overthinking. But deep down, she knew better. That night, as they sat on the couch watching TV, Samantha decided to address the elephant in the room. She muted the show and turned to him. Ethan, I feel like there's something going on with you. You've been different lately. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he seemed like he'd been waiting for her to bring it up. I've just been thinking, he said after a long pause. His voice measured. Thinking about what? She asked. Her tone soft but insistent. About us, he replied, meeting her gaze. About me. About how we've been living our lives. Samantha blinked, caught off guard by the weight in his words. What does that mean? Ethan took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. I feel like I've spent so much of our marriage just coasting. Letting you take the lead. Making all the decisions. And I told myself I was okay with that. But I'm starting to realize it's not okay. Not for me. Anyway. Her heart skipped a beat. Though she quickly masked it with a laugh. So what? You're upset because I'm the one who plans the vacations and picks the restaurants? Is that really such a big deal? It's not about the vacations, Sam, he said, his voice steady but firm. It's about how I feel in this relationship. Like I'm just here, like I don't matter as much as you do. That's not true, she said quickly, her tone defensive. You matter, Ethan, you're my husband. Then why'd I feel like I'm always the punchline? He shot back. His eyes locking onto hers. At Ryan's party, in front of our friends. You didn't just tease me, you humiliated me. And when I tried to tell you how it made me feel, you brushed it off like it wasn't important. Like I wasn't important. Samantha opened her mouth to respond. But the words wouldn't come. For once, she didn't have a quick comeback or a clever retort. She felt the weight of his words. The honesty in them. And it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. I didn't realize you felt that way, she said finally, her voice quieter now. Ethan nodded, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. I know you didn't, but that's part of the problem. Isn't it? You don't see it, and I can't keep living like this. Sam, something has to change. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Samantha sat back, her mind racing. She'd always thought their dynamic worked. That she was the one steering the ship while Ethan was content to follow. But now, she wasn't so sure. For the first time, she felt like she was losing her grip on the life she'd built with him. And for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong all along. The days following their conversation felt heavier than Samantha could handle. Ethan's words lingered in her mind like an unshakable shadow. I can't keep living like this. Sam, something has to change. She had tried to dismiss it. To convince herself that this was just a phase. That Ethan was being overly dramatic. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the knot of unease tightening in her chest. Ethan wasn't backing down this time. And that terrified her. It wasn't just his words that haunted her. It was his actions. Or, more specifically, the lack of them. Ethan had stopped asking her opinion on things. He made plans without consulting her. Spent more time with Ryan and the guys. And seemed perfectly fine carving out his own space. It was subtle, but it felt deliberate, like he was drawing a line she didn't fully understand. One evening, Ethan came home from work and told Samantha he had made plans to go hiking with Ryan that weekend. Hiking? Samantha repeated, raising an eyebrow. Since when do you hike? Ethan shrugged, his tone casual. I've been wanting to try it. Ryan knows some good trails. It was such a simple exchange. But it set something off inside her. Hiking wasn't Ethan's thing, at least. Not the Ethan she thought she knew. He hated being sweaty, and bugs drove him crazy. She found herself staring at him, trying to piece together this new version of her husband who seemed to be growing more independent by the day. Okay, she said, her voice clipped. Have fun, I guess. Ethan nodded, not even seeming to notice the edge in her tone. And that made her even angrier. The following weekend, while Ethan was out on his hiking trip, Samantha found herself alone in their house. Scrolling mindlessly through her phone, she landed on Ryan's Instagram, where he'd posted a photo of himself and Ethan at the top of a rocky trail. Ethan was smiling, the kind of smile that made his dimples show. He looked different, lighter, happier. Samantha stared at the photo longer than she meant to, her chest tightening. She hated how much it bothered her. This was her husband, her Ethan. And yet, for the first time, it felt like he was someone she didn't quite recognize. When Ethan got home that evening, he was flushed and sweaty but grinning from ear to ear. "That was amazing," he said, dropping his backpack by the door. "I didn't think I'd enjoy it that much." Samantha forced a smile. "Glad you had fun. You should come with us next time," Ethan said, his tone genuine. "I think you'd like it." She waved him off. "Hiking's not really my thing. You know that. Maybe you should give it a shot," he replied, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge. "It's nice to try something new." Something about the way he said it, so calm, so confident, rubbed her the wrong way. It was as if he wasn't asking for her approval anymore. As if her opinion didn't matter. For someone who had always been the one in control, it felt like a slap in the face. That night, as they got ready for bed, Samantha couldn't hold it in any longer. "You've been acting different," she said, crossing her arms as she leaned against the bathroom doorframe. "What's going on, Ethan?" Ethan glanced at her through the mirror as he brushed his teeth, rinsing before answering. "I told you, I've been thinking a lot about what I want." "And what exactly does that mean?" she pressed, her tone sharper than she intended. "It means I'm tired of feeling like I don't have a voice in this relationship," Ethan said, turning to face her. "I'm tired of feeling like my needs and opinions don't matter." Samantha felt her temper flare. "Oh, so now you're the victim? After everything I've done for you?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "This isn't about playing the victim, Sam. It's about respect. I've spent years letting you take the lead because I thought that's what worked for us. But I realize now it wasn't working, not for me. Anyway, and you think this is," she shot back, "pulling away from me? Acting like I'm the enemy?" "I'm not pulling away," Ethan said evenly. "I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference." Samantha scoffed. The word, boundaries, hitting her like a slap. "Boundaries? Seriously? Since when did you care about boundaries?" "Since I realized I deserve them," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "Look, I love you, Sam, but I can't keep living like this, walking on eggshells, letting you take every shot at me without saying anything. It's not healthy, for either of us." For a moment, Samantha didn't know what to say. The Ethan standing in front of her wasn't the passive, easygoing man she'd married. He was different now, stronger, more confident, and that scared her in a way she couldn't quite explain. "So what are you saying?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now. "You want a divorce?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I want us to fix this. But I can't do it alone. Sam, you have to meet me halfway." The weight of his words hung in the air. And for the first time, Samantha felt the cracks in their relationship start to split wide open. She had always thought she was the one holding everything together, the one in control, but now, she wasn't so sure. "I'll think about it," she said eventually, though the words felt hollow even as she said them. Ethan nodded, his gaze steady but unreadable. "That's all I'm asking." As he climbed into bed, Samantha stayed where she was, staring at her reflection in the mirror. For the first time, she wondered if she was the problem. And for the first time, she didn't know if she could fix it. Samantha had always believed that she and Ethan would weather any storm. Their relationship might have had its quirks, but they had always managed to find their rhythm again. She thought that no matter how tense things got, they'd snap back to normal, as if nothing had happened. But lately, that belief was starting to feel like wishful thinking. Weeks had passed since their last serious conversation. Samantha had promised to think about it, but she hadn't really done much more than that. The truth was, she didn't know how to fix what was wrong, if she even believed there was anything wrong to begin with. Sure, Ethan had been acting differently. And sure, he'd seemed more distant. But wasn't this just another bump in the road? Wasn't this something he'd eventually move past? That's what she told herself as the days stretched into weeks. But Ethan wasn't letting things go this time. He didn't nag her or bring up their problems every day, that wasn't his style. Instead, he grew quieter, steadier in a way that made her feel strangely unsettled. He wasn't avoiding her, but he also wasn't seeking her out. And every time he said he was going out with Ryan or the guys, it felt less like a casual mention and more like a subtle reminder that he was building a life that didn't revolve around her. One Thursday evening, Samantha sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, half watching a rerun of one of her favorite shows. Ethan walked in, tossing his car keys onto the counter. His hair was slightly damp from the gym, another new habit he'd picked up recently. Samantha noticed how his shoulders looked broader, how he moved with a quiet confidence she hadn't seen in him before. "You're late," she said, glancing at the clock. It wasn't an accusation, but it carried an edge. "I stopped to grab dinner with Ryan," Ethan replied casually, opening the fridge to grab a bottle of water. "Again with Ryan," she muttered under her breath, but loud enough for him to hear. Ethan turned to her, his expression calm but firm. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you've been spending more time with him than with me," Samantha said, setting her phone down. "It's like you're avoiding me." Ethan leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "I'm not avoiding you, Sam. I'm just not sitting around waiting for things to magically get better." Her cheeks flushed, though whether from embarrassment or anger. She wasn't sure. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm trying to figure out what I want," he said plainly, "because right now, I don't think I want this." The room felt like it had dropped 10 degrees. Samantha's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly masked it with a laugh. "You don't mean that. You're just upset." "I've been upset for a long time," Ethan said, his voice steady. "I just didn't know how to say it before. But I'm not going to keep pretending that this is working when it's not." Samantha stared at him, her stomach twisting. "So, what? You're just giving up? That's what you've decided?" "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not giving up. I've been trying to make this work for years, Sam. But it's not a partnership, it's you running the show and me tagging along. And when I finally say something about it, you brush it off like it doesn't matter." Her throat tightened. She wanted to fire back, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. For the first time, she felt completely off balance. "I've asked you to meet me halfway," Ethan continued. "I've asked for counseling, for conversations that don't turn into fights, for some kind of acknowledgement that you hear me. And you haven't done any of it." "That's not fair," Samantha said, her voice cracking. "You're making me out to be the bad guy." "But I've been trying." "Have you?" Ethan interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like you've been waiting for me to just drop it and go back to the way things were." She froze, his words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. He wasn't wrong, and that terrified her. That weekend, Ethan packed a small bag and told Samantha he was going to stay at Ryan's for a few days. "I think we need some space," he said simply. "Space?" she repeated, her voice shaky. "What does that even mean? Are you just walking out on me?" "I'm not walking out," he said. "I just need time to think. And maybe you do too." Her anger flared, masking the panic clawing at her chest. "So you're running to Ryan, is that it? Letting him tell you how awful I am and how you deserve better?" Ethan sighed, his expression weary. "This isn't about Ryan, this is about us. And if you can't see that, then maybe that's the problem." The door closed behind him, and Samantha stood frozen in the silence that followed. For the first time in their entire relationship, Ethan was the one walking away. And for the first time, she didn't know if he'd come back. The days without Ethan felt unbearable. Samantha kept expecting him to text or call, to apologize and say he was coming home. But the silence dragged on. And with each passing day, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Ethan wasn't the same man she'd married. He'd changed, grown into someone who was finally standing up for himself. And she didn't know how to handle it. Late one night, as she sat alone in their dimly lit living room, she found herself scrolling through photos of them from years ago. They looked happy, carefree, like the perfect couple. But now, those images felt like a lifetime ago. Like they belonged to two completely different people. For the first time in years, Samantha felt a pang of fear she couldn't ignore. Maybe Ethan wouldn't come back. And maybe, just maybe, she had no one to blame but herself. The days turned into weeks. And Samantha began to understand that the silence from Ethan wasn't temporary. She had thought, perhaps even hoped, that his absence would be short-lived, a way for him to clear his head before inevitably coming back home. But as each day passed, the weight of his absence pressed heavier on her. The house felt emptier than she ever imagined it could. Ethan stopped by occasionally to grab clothes or other belongings. Always polite but distant. He didn't linger, and he didn't ask how she was doing. It was as if he had already moved on emotionally, while she was stuck in place, grasping at the frayed threads of their marriage. One evening, as Samantha sat on the couch nursing a glass of wine, she saw Ethan's car pull into the driveway. Her stomach twisted with equal parts hope and dread. Maybe this was it, the moment he would come in and tell her he'd had enough time to think. That he was ready to come back home. But when he walked through the door, she immediately noticed the difference. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to finalize something. Samantha, Ethan started, his voice steady. We need to talk. Her heart sank. Those words never led to anything good. Okay, she said, trying to keep her voice calm, though the lump in her throat made it difficult. Ethan sat down in the chair across from her, not beside her on the couch where he used to. The distance felt intentional, like he was drawing a line she couldn't cross. I think we both know this isn't working, he said, his tone calm but resolute. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and I don't see a way forward for us. Her breath caught. Ethan, wait, you can't mean that. I do, he said firmly. I've tried, Sam, I really have, but I can't keep living like this. I can't be in a relationship where I feel invisible, where I'm not respected. Samantha's chest tightened. You're not invisible, she said quickly. I see you, Ethan. I always have. And she stopped herself, unsure of what to say next. The words she wanted to say felt foreign, hollow, like they wouldn't make a difference. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Sam, I know you don't want to hurt me. I know that's not your intention. But the way we are, it's not healthy. It's not fair to either of us. Her throat burned with the effort of holding back tears. So what? You're just giving up on us? After everything we've been through? I'm not giving up, he said softly. I'm letting go. There's a difference. Samantha couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had always been the one in control, the one who decided how things would go. But now, Ethan was the one making the decisions, and she was powerless to stop him. Is this because of Ryan? She asked, grasping for something to hold onto. Did he talk you into this? Make you think you deserve better or something? Ethan shook his head. This isn't about Ryan. This is about me. I've realized I need more from a relationship than what we have. And I think, deep down, you know that too. She opened her mouth to argue, to tell him he was wrong. But the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't angry. He wasn't blaming her. He was just done. For a long moment, the room was silent, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Samantha stared at Ethan, searching for some sign that he might change his mind. But there was nothing. No hesitation. No doubt. What happens now? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. We move forward, separately. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and awkward exchanges. Ethan moved out for good, taking only what he needed and leaving the rest. The house felt emptier than ever, and Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she was the one left behind, both literally and figuratively. The divorce was finalized with little fanfare. No explosive arguments. No bitter fights over who got what. It was civil, almost coldly so. Samantha kept the house, while Ethan took the car and his share of their savings. On paper, it was fair, but emotionally, Samantha felt like she had lost everything. She scrolled through social media late one night, unable to sleep, and stumbled across a new photo on Ryan's account. Ethan was in it, standing at the top of a mountain trail. His face lit up with a genuine smile. He looked happy, lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. The comments were filled with encouragement and support from Ryan and the rest of their group. Looking good, man. So proud of you, Ethan. New chapter. New you. Samantha stared at the photo for what felt like hours. She wanted to tell herself that he was just putting on a show. That the smile was for the camera. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. He was genuinely happy. And he was happy without her. The silence in the house grew unbearable. The life Samantha had built with Ethan, the one she thought she controlled so completely, had slipped through her fingers. She tried to fill the void with distractions, dating apps, busy work, nights out with acquaintances, but nothing felt right. The men she met weren't Ethan. The moments she forced herself to laugh felt hollow. And every time she saw Ethan's name pop up on her newsfeed, that same sinking feeling washed over her. She had told herself that the divorce was for the best. That Ethan wasn't the man she needed. But as the months wore on, she began to wonder if she had been wrong. Maybe Ethan was the man she needed. Maybe she just hadn't realized it until it was too late. And now, as she sat alone in the house they used to share, Samantha couldn't shake the gnawing thought that haunted her every waking moment. What if I was the problem all along? Months passed since the divorce papers were signed. And Samantha couldn't deny that her life felt hollow in ways she hadn't expected. The house was too quiet. The bed too big. And the routines she once controlled so meticulously now felt meaningless. She tried telling herself that this was temporary. That she just needed time to adjust. But every time she saw a photo of Ethan on social media, smiling, hiking, or laughing with friends, her chest tightened in a way she hated to admit. Ethan looked good. Better than good. Actually, he looked like a man who had found himself. Like he was thriving in a way Samantha had never seen before. And that terrified her. The man she had once dismissed as passive, too quiet, too soft, he was now someone others admired. Someone she barely recognized. It wasn't just his photos. It was the comments underneath them. The ones from people Samantha used to consider their friends. Proud of you, Ethan. You're killing it. This is the version of you we always knew was there. So glad to see you finally living your best life. It was the word, finally, that stung the most. It implied that something had been holding him back before. That something, or someone, had been her. One night, as she sat alone on the couch with her second glass of wine, Samantha decided to message her best friend, Claire. Claire had been her sounding board throughout the divorce. The one person who hadn't vanished from her life when everything else seemed to crumble. I don't get it, she typed. How is he so okay? How is he so happy? Claire's reply came quickly. Maybe because he's not carrying the weight anymore. He's free now, Sam. Samantha frowned at the screen, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. Free from what? Me? Claire's next message took longer to arrive. But when it did, it hit harder than Samantha was prepared for. Maybe, you were tough on him, Sam. You know that. I wasn't that bad, Samantha replied, though the words felt defensive. Even to her, it was just our dynamic. I was the one who kept things moving. He needed that. Maybe he didn't need it as much as you thought. Claire wrote back. Maybe he needed you to let him be himself. The conversation left Samantha feeling restless. She poured herself another glass of wine. But it didn't dull the knot of discomfort in her chest. Had she been too hard on Ethan? Had she stifled him without even realizing it? Samantha's attempt to move on was less successful than she wanted to admit. She tried dating apps, but every date felt like a hollow imitation of what she was looking for. The men she met were either too self-absorbed, too indecisive, or just too, not Ethan. No one made her laugh the way he did. No one had that quiet steadiness that had once driven her crazy but now seemed irreplaceable. One night, after another disappointing date, Samantha found herself scrolling through Ethan's social media again. She told herself it was harmless. Just curiosity. But it felt more like self-punishment. His latest post was a picture of him at a group dinner. He was smiling, his arm slung casually over the back of his chair, surrounded by people who clearly adored him. The caption read, "Great food. Better company. Grateful for where life is taking me." Grateful. The word sent a pang through her chest. He was grateful for his life without her. The following week, Samantha was at the grocery store when she saw him. Ethan, standing in the produce aisle. looking at a display of apples. He hadn't seen her yet. And for a moment, she debated turning around and walking away. But something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the gnawing need to see if he was really as happy as his photos suggested. "Ethan," she called out, her voice wavering slightly. He turned, and for a split second, she saw the surprise on his face. But then he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made her heart ache. "Sam," he said. "Hey." There was no bitterness in his tone. No trace of the tension that had hung between them for so long. He looked at peace. They made small talk, catching up on the basics. How work was going. How the house was holding up. How their mutual friends were doing. But as the conversation went on, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she was speaking to a stranger. This Ethan was confident, self-assured, and completely unburdened. It was the version of him she had always hoped for, only now. It wasn't for her. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said finally, her voice softer than she intended. "Thanks," Ethan said. "I hope you are too." She nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm figuring it out." He gave her one last warm smile before excusing himself to finish his shopping. "Take care of yourself, Sam," he said as he walked away. That night, as she sat alone in the house they used to share, Samantha finally let herself cry. Not the frustrated tears she had shed during the divorce or the angry tears she'd blamed on Ethan's friends. These were different, raw and filled with the weight of realization. She had been wrong about so much. Wrong about Ethan, wrong about their relationship, and wrong about what she thought she wanted. For so long, she had seen herself as the one who held everything together. The one who knew what was best for both of them. But now, she could see that in trying to control everything, she had lost the one thing that really mattered. And there was no going back. Samantha stared at her phone, her finger hovering over Ethan's name in her contacts. For a moment, she considered texting him, saying she was sorry, asking if there was any chance they could try again. But then she stopped. Ethan had moved on, and deep down, she knew he deserved this happiness. Even if it didn't include her. For the first time, Samantha admitted to herself that maybe the best thing she could do for Ethan, and for herself, was to let go. And as painful as it was, she knew it was the only way to truly move forward. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps us out. And if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts. So drop a comment below and let us know what you think. Stay tuned for more exciting content coming your way soon. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you in the next one.